Rishi Sunak go head-to-head at Prime Minister's questions. We'll have full coverage of every moment, and we'll be getting reaction from Labour MP for Bolsover, Natalie Fleet, and Shadow Veterans Minister Andrew Bowie.
We'll go straight to the chamber just as soon as the Prime Minister on his feet. Different position from your normal position. You are now in opposition. What should your leader, the leader of the opposition, Rishi Sunak, put to Keir Starmer today?
Getting used to, obviously, I think Grenfell will quite rightly dominate the news agenda, but there is a statement on that coming up immediately after PMQ. So if I was Rishi today, I would probably go on the winter fuel allowance decision made before the recess.
And Natalie, what would you say to that? Are pensioners going to freeze this winter?
I'd go in really hard if I was Keir Starmer on the government's mess. The last government put us into record levels of debt, and it means that we've had to make really difficult choices to provide economic stability so that we can all benefit in the long term. Keir Starmer never went into politics to make this decision, and I certainly didn't. We shouldn't be here.
It's your fault. That's what the Labour comeback is, Andrew Bowie.
We keep talking about this inheritance that Labour have got from the Conservative Party. They got the fastest growing economy in the G7, unemployment at record low levels, and indeed manufacturing just yesterday proving to be at its highest level ever. That's the inheritance we passed on, and it was a good inheritance.
£22 billion black hole.
But it's a spurious claim, and actually some of which has been contributed to by
Prime Minister's on his feet. We're going live.
Congratulate our Team GB Olympic and Paralympic athletes and support staff for their outstanding achievements so far. Mr. Speaker, yesterday's incident in the Channel was shocking and deeply tragic, and our thoughts are with all those who've lost their lives and their families. We must have a renewed determination to end this. And Mr. Speaker, the chair of the Grenfell Tower inquiry, Sir Martin Morbick, has today published the inquiry's Phase 2 report. And I know that the whole House will be, thoughts of the House will be with the bereaved and the survivors of the Grenfell Tower tragedy and the residents in the immediate community. I will be making a statement shortly after PMQs today. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later.
Bill Esterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about the loss of life in the Channel and about Grenfell? The latest suicide figures are a sobering reminder of the misery caused by mental ill health. McGall Health Park in my constituency is a centre of excellence with high, medium and low security hospitals on the same site. The staff do an amazing job, but demand has gone through the roof, especially since the pandemic. Does my right honourable friend agree that it is essential that we have the same level of priority for mental health care and physical health care in this country?
Yes, and I thank my honourable friend for raising this critical issue. I think so many are affected by the tragedy of suicide. I'm pleased to hear about the work that he refers to, but 1 million people are not getting the support, the mental health support that they need. And that is why we will recruit 8,500 mental health workers to treat adults and children, and bring forward legislation to modernise the Mental Health Act, an act which I think is well overdue for modernisation. Thank you.
We come to the Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I join with the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the Grenfell community, and we're going to rightly discuss that important issue shortly after PMQs. Can I also join him in congratulating our record-breaking Olympians and Paralympians on everything that they have achieved. And lastly, could I just pay tribute to the hard work, bravery and dedication of our police. This summer, in challenging circumstances, they served our communities commendably and kept us all safe. Now, Mr. Speaker, government is about making choices, and the new Prime Minister has made a choice. He has chosen to take the winter fuel allowance away from low-income pensioners and give that money to certain unionised workforces in inflation-busting pay rises. So can I just ask the Prime Minister, why did he choose train drivers over Britain's vulnerable pensioners?
Mr. Speaker, this government was elected to clear up the mess left by the party opposition and to bring about the change that the country desperately needs. Our first job was to audit the books. And what we found was a £22 billion black hole. Well, it's no good them complaining. Richard Hughes, the chair of the OBR, was very clear. He described it as one of the largest overspends against forecasts outside of the pandemic. His words. So we've had to take tough decisions to stabilise the economy and repair the damage, including targeting winter fuel payments whilst protecting pensioners. 800,000 pensioners are not taking up pension credit. We intend to turn that around. We're going to align housing benefit and pension credit, something the previous government deferred year after year after year. And because of our commitment to the triple lock, pensions are projected to increase by over £1,000 in the next 5 years.
Rishi Sunak.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister also inherited inflation back at target, interest rates being cut, unemployment low, and indeed the fastest growing economy in the G7, Mr. Speaker. But that's not the point, because the Prime Minister now has to start taking responsibility for his own decision. And if, as he says, the public finances are a priority, it was his decision, and his decision alone, to award a train driver on £65,000 a pay rise of almost £10,000. And it was also his decision that a pensioner living on just £13,000 will have their winter fuel allowance removed. So can the Prime Minister explain to Britain's low-income pensioners why he has taken money away from them whilst at the same time given more money to highly paid train drivers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we spent the whole election with him trying to tell the country that everything was fine, and this is the result they got. A massive mandate on this side to change the country. And if he carries on pretending everything is fine for ordinary people across the country, they're going to be there for a very, very long time. And I remind him that we inherited absolute chaos from the party opposite. We lost an average of 3 million working days a year to strikes under his watch. And you cannot fix the economy if the trains don't work, and you can't fix the economy if the NHS isn't working. And when it comes to winter fuel payments, they're having a competition, as I understand. They're going to be voting later on today. Well, his shadow housing minister, we found this. She's the favourite, I think. Some of them will be probably voting for her this afternoon. She said, her words, "I have people in my constituency telling me they don't need winter fuel payments. Why do we not have a more sophisticated mechanism for mean testing?" That's their favourite, I think, in the contest that they are having.
Mr. Speaker, again, the Prime Minister talked about the public finances. The UK's public finances are more robust than almost that of any other major advanced economy. Here we have it. He inherited a lower deficit than France, America, Italy.
Order. When I do point you to be quiet, I do mean it. I don't need a reaction back like that.
Well, the UK currently has a lower deficit than France, America, Italy and Japan. It has the second lowest debt in the entire G7. And he opposed every difficult decision that we took to deliver that. So I certainly am not going to take any lectures from him on that score. But he talked about protecting ordinary people. Well, last year, under the Conservative government, a low-income pensioner with just £13,000 received not only the winter fuel payment, but also hundreds of pounds of additional cost of living support, both of which he has now scrapped. Age UK have said cutting the winter fuel allowance is the wrong policy. And only this morning, we've learned that the vast majority of the poorest pensioners in poverty, are going to see that vital support removed. So can he tell the House, very specifically to the pensioners that are watching, how much less support a pensioner on £13,000 will receive this winter?
He talks about tough decisions. It's tough to inherit £22 billion black hole, which the OBR did not need. That is the inheritance. That's what they left. Now, back when they were in government, they'd have pretended it wasn't there. They'd have walked past it, put it in the long grass. We're not going to do that because we were elected to change this country for the better and stabilise our economy. No Prime Minister wants to do what we have to do in relation to the winter fuel allowance, but we have to take the tough decision to stabilise our economy to ensure that we can grow it for the future. And as I've said, we are working hard on pension credit. We're allowing housing benefits, which they didn't do for years, and over 5 years, this projected increase of up to £1,000 for those on pensions. We are tough decisions that they don't.
The government doesn't have to choose to take money off low-income pensioners in order to give it to highly paid train drivers. That is a choice that he has made, and it will be clear to any pensioners watching that he simply can't explain why he has made that choice. But, Mr. Speaker, turning to another important issue. The government has suspended 30 of the UK's 350 arms export licences to Israel. It's a decision that the Chief Rabbi says beggars belief and will encourage our shared enemies. Can the Prime Minister therefore explain how his decision will help to secure the release of the 101 hostages still being held by Hamas?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I start by saying I think the whole House will be shocked by the horrific killing of 6 hostages in the last few days. And I know I speak for the whole House when I say that. The remaining hostages must be released. And we need a ceasefire to ensure that that can happen, that aid desperately needed can get into the region, and we can begin the path to a two-state solution. Now, he asks how we arrived at this decision. He knows very well, because the legal framework is clear. The latest guidance was issued in 2021 under his government. And that means that licences have to be kept under review, as they were by his government. And I think he probably knows the advice that was given to his government. He understands the framework. We've carried out the review in the same way and come to a clear legal conclusion. And shared that conclusion, the assessment, with Parliament. We will, of course, continue to stand by Israel's right to self-defence. But it is important that we are a country committed to the international rule of law. That gives us the strength of argument with our allies on important issues. This is a difficult issue, I recognise that, but it's a legal decision, not a policy decision. And the Prime Minister knows the framework, and they shout, they issued the guidance, they know what the test is, that test has been assessed, we've come to a conclusion, and we've put that before the House to consider.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the Prime Minister's answer, but he'll know that decisions like this also have important and broader geopolitical implications. And he mentioned allies. It's essential that we maintain transatlantic unity in the face of terrorist threats and avoid any perception of splits between our two nations. So can he therefore update the House or tell the House what engagement he had with the United States prior to taking this significant decision?
Prime Minister.
I acknowledge the importance of working with our allies on all issues, as we have been doing, as I was able to make very clear at the NATO summit that I attended in the early summer. And of course, as he would expect, as the House would expect, we have talked this through with our allies. They understand. They have a different legal system. That is the point they made. It chunters from the start. This is a serious issue. It requires serious consideration. And the Prime Minister knows the legal framework. He knows the legal framework very well. He also knows that applying that framework, the facts of that framework, and arriving at a decision does not permit me to simply then say I'm not going to implement the legal decision and conclusion that's been reached. I don't think he's really inviting me to do that.
Mr. Speaker, not only do these decisions have geopolitical consequences, but they also have emotional ones too. And the Prime Minister took this action on the very same day as the funerals of Israeli hostages murdered by Hamas. It's something that the Board of Deputies described as a terrible, terrible message to be sending. And I hope the Prime Minister understands the hurt that has been caused, and can he take this opportunity to reassure Israel and the Jewish community that the United Kingdom and this House stands behind Israel and its right to self-defence?
Prime Minister.
Let me be very clear about that. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We absolutely recognise and support Israel's right to self-defence and have taken action in support of that right of self-defence. And I've made that repeatedly clear in all of my engagements with Israel across the region and with all of our allies. I absolutely stand by that. But in relation to licences, this isn't an Israel issue. It's the framework for all licences that have to be kept under review. It's the same test for all licences, as the Prime Minister knows. And having applied the law to the facts and come to a legal conclusion, I don't think the Prime Minister is really inviting me to put that to one side. We have to, the Leader of the Opposition. This is a serious issue. We either comply with international law or we don't. And we only have strength in our arguments because we comply with international law. I appreciate the party opposite didn't think that international law mattered, and that's why we got into the pickle that we did.
Lloyd Hatton.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Home Office's decision to close the Bibby Stockholm barge in my constituency. We all know this barge is a gimmick. First, it arrived late. Second, it cost the taxpayer a fortune. Third, it was laden with fire and disease risks. And fourth, it likely contributed to the death of a 27-year-old asylum seeker on board. So can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that this unworkable gimmick and similar unworkable gimmicks will be closed down as we clear up the mess from the party opposite?
I thank my honourable friend for the question. Unlike the party opposite, we won't waste money on gimmicks. And that's why within days we ended the Rwanda scheme, we announced the launch of the Border Security Force, and we're preparing legislation to introduce counter-terrorism powers to tackle gangs. And in the first 2 months, we've removed more than 400 people on planes who had no right to be here. Compare that with the 4 volunteers sent to Rwanda that cost £700 million. This is a government of service, not a government of gimmicks.
Here comes the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Trev Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the Prime Minister's words about the terrible tragedy at Grenfell, welcome the inquiry and look forward to the statement we'll discuss shortly. Mr. Speaker, for the last 18 years, Norman has been a full-time carer for his wife, Ros, who has MS and Alzheimer's disease. Earlier this year, he was forced to go back to work to earn the extra money for the cost of caring for his wife. As their income is just a few £100s above the limit for pension credit, they're set to lose their winter fuel allowance unless the Prime Minister listens to these benches and others and changes this plan. So, if he doesn't, what advice does the Prime Minister have to Norman and Ros and millions of struggling pensioners as they face rising heating bills this winter?
Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable member for raising that important question. I know how much he, both politically and personally, has championed carers. We have taken a difficult decision, and I'm not pretending it's not a difficult decision. Of course it's a difficult decision, because we have to stabilise the economy. We have to stabilise the economy. We went through, the first thing the Chancellor did was an audit. She found £22 billion worth of unfunded spending commitments. We can't walk past that. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. That's what the last government did. We have to take tough decisions. We will put all the support in that we can, obviously talk to the learned gentleman about this, but we have to take the tough decisions in relation to this. They walked away from those decisions. That's what got us into the mess in the first place. You can't grow your economy, you can't fix your economy unless you stabilise it first.
Ed Davey.
Can I say to the Prime Minister, we recognise the appalling financial problems left to him by the last Conservative government, but can I say no one understands the difficult decisions you need to take to balance the books as unpaid family carers like Norman. So many millions of pensioners have struggled over recent years thanks to the last government. The number of pensioners who can't afford to heat their homes has doubled since 2019. So will the Prime Minister support our campaign for more urgent action to invest in insulation and renewables so we can help pensioners and all families make it cheaper to heat their homes every winter?
Yes, of course. And I remind him that there are 800,000 pensioners who are not claiming pension credit, which of course then deals with the winter payment allowance. And so that's why we are taking so much care to ensure that we can get them onto pension credit. Again, aligning housing benefit with pension credit, something they left undone for years, will make a massive difference. And of course the triple lock, which over 5 years will mean pensions are expected to rise by up to £1,000.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 4 years ago, the previous government ordered a review into the hormone pregnancy test drug Primados and found that the drug had caused avoidable harm. Primados was given to women in the 1960s and the 70s and resulted in many babies being born with severe disabilities. For the last 12 years, I have stood in this Parliament and pleaded with the last government repeatedly to do the right thing. So I ask the Prime Minister today, will he commit to take a fresh approach to this issue, and will he meet with me and the campaigner Marie Lyon to discuss how we can give closure to the families who have been denied justice for the last 50 years?
Well, I thank her for that question and for her work on the APPG. I am sympathetic to the families who believe their children suffered from these tests. And committed to reviewing any new evidence which comes to light. Mr. Speaker, at the moment the Health Department is reviewing a publication from Professor Danielson, and we'll follow the results of that review. And I'm happy to ensure that the Health Minister does meet her to discuss this further.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for visiting Northern Ireland within the last fortnight, and particularly for the time he spent with injured officers of the Police Service of Northern Ireland. He will know of their courage, but he will also know of the dogged determination of our Chief Constable, John Boucher, in his desire to see adequate resourcing for his officers who not only stand for law and order in Northern Ireland, but stand in the face of racism, of violence, and of an ongoing national security threat from dissident Republicans. So can I therefore ask him to earnestly and urgently engage in a discussion about uplifting the national security grant afforded to the Police Service of Northern Ireland and ensure that the PSNI can face the challenges that we need them to face head on?
Well, I thank him for that question, and it was important for me to go to Belfast to meet the injured officers and to say simply thank you for what they are doing, and of course the impact it has on their families. I do recognise the difficult financial position the PSNI faces, and the Chief Constable and I have spoken about this on more than one occasion, as you would expect. I mean, predominantly it's for the Justice Minister and the Executive to set the PSNI's budget, and an operational matter for the Chief Constable in relation to how he allocates that. But I have been talking to him about what further support might be possible, because I do realise just how important it is to him and to the PSNI and to Northern Ireland more generally.
Emma Foodie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, ticket-selling websites like Ticketmaster left millions of Oasis fans furious. But worse still came minutes later when tickets started to be relisted online for thousands of pounds. This profiteering at fans' expense is not a one-off. The Cooperative Party's campaigning for a new licensing body with real teeth to tackle this online touting. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that fans should be at the heart of live music and that urgent action is needed to protect fans against this horrid practice?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I do. And firstly, it's great that Oasis are back together. I think, from what I've determined, about half the country is probably queuing for tickets over the weekend. But it is depressing to hear of price hikes. I'm committed to putting fans at the heart of music, and end extortionate price resales, and we're starting a consultation to work out how best we can do this.
Harriet Cross.
Mr. Speaker, Offshore Energies UK reports that the government's proposed windfall tax increases will cost our economy £13 billion, risk 35,000 jobs, and see investment in the North Sea slashed from £14.1 billion to just £2.3 billion by 2029. It also suggests that there's going to be a £12 billion cost in tax revenues. How does this proposal chime with the Prime Minister's goal of economic growth, and will he reverse this tax increase, which industry leaders are calling economic suicide for the oil and gas sector?
Mr. Speaker, we're committed to the transition that is necessary in relation to energy to renewables, which will lead to cheaper energy, energy independence and the jobs of the future. But let me be clear, oil and gas will play its part for many years to come, and that's why I've been really clear about the support that we have for oil and gas. And I'm sure she and others will want to celebrate the fact that just this week, Contracts for Difference secured a record 131 new clean energy projects, enough to power 11 million homes, and that is the jobs of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will remember visiting my constituency in June, where we toured Germany Beck, a fantastic development of 600 new homes. But because of Tory dither and delay, it took the best part of a decade for that site to get through planning. You can grumble all you want, but my families are paying the price for their mistakes. Can the Prime Minister reassure me that this government will speed up the planning process so we can get more homes built, and will one of his ministers meet with me to discuss the housing crisis in York?
Yes, I remember that visit well, and was struck by the delays in planning because the system was broken by the previous government. We will deliver 1.5 million new homes, Mr. Speaker, drive economic growth and fulfil the dream of home ownership, shattered for 14 years under the former government. And that means changing the planning rules, a tough decision they were not prepared to make that happen and to grow our economy. Thank you.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, SSE, the operators of the new Viking Energy wind farm in Shetland, were paid £2 million in order not to generate any electricity from it. Is there not something badly wrong with an energy market that pays big corporates not to produce electricity, while the people living amongst the turbines endure some of the highest levels of fuel poverty in the country? So will the Prime Minister and the Government now look seriously at the idea of an islands tariff, so that islands communities such as those represented by me and by his honourable friend from the Helen and the Near may see some genuine benefit for the community from hosting renewable energy developments such as this?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this issue, which is obviously a considerable concern to him and his constituents. The National Grid, as he knows, does balance the grid by occasionally requesting some generators to stop when there's not enough capacity on the network. That's not good enough. That's not acceptable for the reasons set out in his question. It's a problem that wasn't fixed over the last 14 years, but a problem we are determined to fix as we go forward. And I will make sure that a relevant minister speaks to him about the particular issue in his constituency.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. As a surgeon from East Anglia, I welcome the measures the new government has taken to fulfil its mission to fix the NHS. In my constituency of Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, the West Suffolk Hospital is badly affected by RAC. Just like the James Paget Hospital in Norfolk, where I've worked for nearly 30 years. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the RAC hospitals must be priorities as the new government undertakes its review of the new hospital programme?
I thank him for his question, and also he brings huge expertise to this area. We have to reset the new hospital programme and put it on a sustainable footing. The last government promised 40 new hospitals. The problem is there weren't 40, they weren't new, and some of them weren't even hospitals. Hospitals with RAC will, of course, including West Suffolk Hospital, must be a priority. So we're reviewing the programme, and the Secretary of State will update Parliament as soon as possible.
After 14 miserable years of the worst Tory government in modern times, the best this Prime Minister can offer the British people is things can only get worse. Well, for him and his calamitous opinion ratings, that's probably true. But why does he think he has such an unprecedented fall in his popularity? Is it his attacks on the pensioners? Is it leaving children in poverty? Is it the re-emergence of Labour cronyism? Or is it because his austerity is even worse than the Conservative variety?
I remember when they used to sit here. It's a long way up, and there's very few of them, so I don't think we need lectures on popularity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this week's news on the changes, the government plans around Ofsted, including the removal of single-word judgments. This is great news for head teachers in West Lancashire who've raised this issue with me, along with other issues around Ofsted, and for parents who will have more transparency on the performance of schools. How does the Prime Minister see these changes developing a more positive relationship between Ofsted, government and schools, and improving standards so that all our young people can thrive?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're committed to the best education for every child, whatever their background and wherever they come from. The current single grade does not work well, and that's why we're going to have a richer dashboard which will give parents more information and allow intervention more quickly, and that's why it's been so warmly welcomed across the country.
Rebecca Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am new to this House, but I know that we all want our pensioners to live with dignity and security. In my constituency of Reigate, there are around 17,000 pensioners expected to lose their winter fuel payment this year.
Shocking.
Of most concern are those just above the pension credit threshold who will be hardest hit. Would the Prime Minister give consideration to broadening the eligibility for the winter fuel payment so that those low-income pensioners who rely on it to stay warm can continue to benefit?
Can I welcome her to her place? And Reigate is obviously a place I know very well, as she knows. But the reality is this. This decision has been taken because of the £22 billion black card. So responsibility for the decision lies with the party that broke the economy. There's a reason we have a mandate for change, and there's a reason that this party is now sitting there, and that's because they broke the economy. And I'm not going to apologise for clearing up the mess that they left.
Deirdre Costigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 14 years of Conservative failure, crime and street drinking now blight areas of Southall Town Centre, West Ealing and Hanwell Broadway in my constituency of Ealing Southall. So can the Prime Minister set out how his government will take action to ensure our town centres are transformed into places where my constituency can finally feel safe again?
Thank you. This is an important issue, Mr. Speaker, and I've heard too many people say that antisocial behaviour is some sort of low-level issue. It really impacts lives across the country. We have to tackle it, and that's why we will put more police on the streets. We will have more effective powers to deal with antisocial behaviour, and we'll introduce Young Futures programmes to divert young people who are getting into trouble.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Question number 14, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Schools Minister will be happy to visit his constituency.
Sir Ashley Fox.
I thank the Prime Minister for his answer. Haygrove School is one of the top performing schools in Somerset. It is unfortunately one of those built by Caledonian Modular and now condemned as unsafe. So I'm grateful for the meeting with the Schools Minister. But can the Prime Minister give Haygrove School and the other schools affected an assurance that they will be rebuilt and quickly? because those pupils and staff are still working in porter cabins.
I'm grateful. I do recognise how serious an issue this is and why he raises it. It is of real importance. The Minister will visit, and the Department of Education is pursuing all available avenues for redress against the parties responsible for the issues at the school. But I will make sure that the Minister is fully briefed and has a full discussion about this when that visit takes place.
Sean Davis.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a proud MP for a new town, but over the last 14 years, Telford has lost its A&E, less police officers, GPs, teachers per head, and we've also had 40% cuts to our local government budgets. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, back places like Telford rather than overlook us, as has been the case over these last 14 years?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this issue, and I know he'll be a really strong champion for his constituency. We're a government that will be based on actions, not slogans, and that's why we'll have local growth plans, improve public services, and invest in transport links. We will fix the mess that they left after 14 years, and we will devolve power to those with skin in the game.
Tim Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last 5 years, there have been 10 fatal accidents on the A66 along the short stretch in the Eden Valley in Westmoreland. So in our community, we are naturally deeply concerned that the vital A66 Northern Transpennine project, which would make the roads considerably safer, has been put under review by this government. Will the Prime Minister take the opportunity now and end this uncertainty today, commit to this project and save lives?
I thank him for raising this question about fatalities on roads, and that is a very serious issue in relation to the A66 and other roads across the country. We have inherited a broken economy. We have to review what we're spending money on. We're going through that review, and we'll report back as soon as we can.
Gurinder Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in sending condolences to the family of Jazia Coke, a 13-year-old boy who was stabbed and tragically killed in my constituency? Does the Prime Minister share my concerns about the prevalence of young people carrying knives, and what more can be done to end this scourge that is destroying families and communities?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure I speak for the whole House in saying our thoughts are with Jazia's family at this difficult time. This is tragic, it is senseless, and the age just absolutely makes one shudder. Our mission is to halve knife crime. Zombie-style knives and zombie-style machetes will be banned from the 24th of September, and there'll be a surrender scheme which has been started on 26th of August. And we are doing a rapid review on online sale of knives, which is often a problem in these cases. So we will pursue that with determination, and I invite everybody across the House, in light of this and so many other tragic cases, to join with us on that mission.
Final question, Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Those of us from Staffordshire Moorlands are immensely proud of our beautiful area and unique identity. So can the Prime Minister guarantee that we will not be forced into a devolution deal or local government reorganisation against our will?
I think it's very important that local people have a say, but it's equally important that we do devolve to those who have skin in the game. And one of the ways in which we can restart our economy is making sure that those with skin in the game take the decisions that are relevant to them and their area.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. I'll let those who are leaving the chamber leave quickly before we start the statement.
And that was Prime Minister Keir Starmer taking questions by MPs in the House of Commons.
We're going to stay with these live pictures because in just a moment the Prime Minister will give a statement on the Grenfell fire inquiry, which released its final report earlier today. Now, we know you've been sending in your questions to us. Today is obviously an unusual day, a sombre backdrop to Prime Minister's questions because it falls on the day that the report has been published. The Prime Minister has already said that he wants to ensure that a tragedy like this never happens again, and he will give MPs details. They will be able to question him about that too.
We probably won't be able to get to many of your questions. We've already got Keir Starmer standing up for that statement.
Sir Martin Morbick published the final report of the Grenfell Tower inquiry. And I'm sure the whole House will join me in thanking him, the members of the inquiry and the whole team for their dedicated work. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak directly to the bereaved families, the survivors and those in the immediate Grenfell community, some of whom are with us in the gallery today. Sir Martin concluded this morning, and I'm afraid there's no way of repeating this that won't be painful. He said the simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and that those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by, as the report lays out in full, just about every institution responsible for ensuring their safety. Mr. Speaker, in the face of an injustice so painful, so deserving of anger, words can begin to lose their meaning. 7 years still waiting for the justice that you deserve. I want to say very clearly on behalf of the country, you've been let down so badly before, during and in the aftermath of this tragedy. And while Sir Martin sets out a catalogue of appalling industry failures, for which there must now be full accountability, he also finds, and I quote, decades of failure by central government. He concludes that in the years between the fire at Knowsley Heights in 1991 and the fire at Grenfell Tower in 2017, there were many opportunities for the government to identify the risks posed by the use of combustible cladding panels and insulation. And he concludes, and I quote, by 2016, the department was well aware of those risks, but failed to act on what they knew. He further finds that the department itself was poorly run, and the government's deregulatory agenda dominated the department's thinking to such an extent that even matters affecting the safety of life were ignored, delayed, or disregarded. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to start with an apology on behalf of the British state to each and every one of you, and indeed to all of the families affected by this tragedy. It should never have happened. The country failed to discharge its most fundamental duty, to protect you and your loved ones, the people that we are here to serve, and I am deeply sorry. I also want to express my admiration for the strength it must have taken to relive these events when giving your evidence to the inquiry, and indeed to see written down today the circumstances that led to the death of your loved ones. After all you've been through, you may feel you're always one step away from another betrayal. I get that, and I know I cannot change that with just words today. But what I can say is I listened carefully to one of the members of the inquiry, Ali Akbar, this morning, who said this: what is needed is for those with responsibility for building safety to reflect and to treat Grenfell as a touchstone in all that they do in the future. Mr. Speaker, I consider myself someone responsible for building safety, and that is exactly what I will do and what I'll demand of this government. Mr. Speaker, today is a long-awaited day of truth, but it must now lead to a day of justice. Yes. Justice for the victims and the families of Grenfell. Absolutely. But also a moment to reflect on the state of social justice in our country, and a chance for this government of service to turn the page. Because this tragedy poses fundamental questions about the kind of country we are. A country where the voices of working class people and those of colour have been repeatedly ignored and dismissed. Yeah. A country where tenants of a social housing block in one of the richest parts of the land are treated like second-class citizens. shamefully dismissed, in the words of one survivor, as people with needs and problems not respected as citizens, as people who contribute to Britain, who are part of Britain, who belong in Britain. And Mr. Speaker, unbelievably, this continued even after the tragedy. Sir Martin highlights, and I quote, certain aspects of the response demonstrated a marked lack of respect for human decency and dignity, and left many of those immediately affected feeling abandoned by authority and utterly helpless. Mr. Speaker, that alone should make anyone who feels any affinity towards justice bristle with anger. But Sir Martin continues. He finds, and these are his words, Mr. Speaker, systematic dishonesty on the part of those who made and sold the rain screen cladding panels and insulation products. And he goes on to say, they engaged in deliberate and sustained strategies to manipulate the testing process, misrepresent test data, and mislead the market. Sir Martin also cites a complete failure on the part of the local authority building control over a number of years to take basic steps to ensure that the certificates it issued were technically accurate. He finds that the work of the building research establishment was marred by unprofessional conduct, inadequate practices, a lack of effective oversight, poor reporting, and a lack of scientific rigour, and that the tenant management organisation must bear a share of the blame. Its only fire safety assessor, these are his words, had misrepresented his experience and qualifications, some of which he invented, and was ill-informed to carry out fire risk assessments on buildings of the size and complexity of Grenfell Tower. He also finds a chronic lack of effective management and leadership on behalf of the London Fire Brigade, with tragic consequences on the night of the fire. Mr. Speaker, in the light of such findings, it is imperative that there is full accountability, including through the criminal justice process, and that this happens as swiftly as possible. So I can tell the House today that this government will write to all companies found by the inquiry to be part of these horrific failings as the first step to stopping them being awarded government contracts. And we will, of course, support the Metropolitan Police and the prosecutors as they complete their investigations. But, Mr. Speaker, it is vital that as we respond to this report today, we do not do or say anything that could compromise any future prosecution, because the greatest injustice of all would be for the victims and all those affected not to get the justice that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, there must also be more radical action to stop something like this from ever happening again, because one of the most extraordinary qualities of the Grenfell community is their determination to look forward. They are not only fighting for justice for themselves, they are fighting to ensure that no other community suffers as they have done. Mr. Speaker, some important reforms have taken place in the last 7 years, reforms that we supported in opposition, including banning combustible cladding, new oversight of building control, a new safety regime for all residential buildings over 18 metres, new legal requirements on social landlords, making sure fire and rescue services are trained and equipped to handle large-scale incidents, including moving from stay put to get out when needed. And we're now addressing the recommendation from Sir Martin's first report to introduce a new residential personal emergency evacuation plan policy for anyone whose ability to evacuate could be compromised, and funding from this from renting in social housing. Mr. Speaker, we will look at all 58 of Sir Martin's recommendations in detail. There will be a debate on the floor of this House. We will respond in full to the inquiry's recommendations within 6 months, and we will update Parliament annually on our progress against every commitment that we make. But there are some things I can say right now. There are still buildings today with unsafe cladding, and the speed at which this is being addressed is far, far too slow. We only have to look at the fire in Dagenham last week, a building that was still in the process of having its cladding removed. So this must be a moment of change, We'll take the necessary steps to speed this up. We will be willing to force freeholders to assess their buildings and enter remediation schemes within set timetables, with a legal requirement to force action if that is what it takes. And we will set out further steps on remediation this autumn. We will also reform the construction products industry that make this fatal cladding so homes are made of safe materials. And those who compromise that safety will face the consequences. We will ensure that tenants and their leaseholders can never again be ignored, and that social landlords are held to account for the decency and safety of their homes. And as this government tackles the most acute housing crisis in living memory, building 1.5 million new homes across the country, we will ensure those homes are safe, secure, and built to the highest standards. Places of security, health, and well-being that serve the needs of residents and their wider communities. Because a safe and decent home is a human right and a basic expectation, and the provision of that right should never be undermined by the reckless pursuit of greed. One of the tragedies of Grenfell is that this is a community that nurtured so much of what we want from housing. People who had made the tower their home and were entitled to a place of safety and security, not a death trap. And yet, time and again, they were ignored. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, I made a private visit to Grenfell Tower and laid a wreath at the memorial wall, and affirmed this government's commitment to the work of the Memorial Commission, delivering a permanent memorial on the site through a process led by the Grenfell community. As I walked down that narrow staircase from the 23rd floor and looked at walls burned by 1,000-degree heat, I got just a sense of how utterly terrifying it must have been. And as I saw examples of the cladding on the outside of the building and listened to descriptions of the catastrophic and completely avoidable failures of that fatal refurbishment, I felt just a sense of the anger that now rises through that building. And it left me, Mr. Speaker, with the profound and very personal determination to make the legacy of Grenfell Tower one of the defining changes to our country that I want to make as Prime Minister. To the families, the survivors, and the immediate community, we will support you now and always, especially those that were children. In the memory of your loved ones, we will deliver a generational shift in the safety and quality of housing for everyone in this country. And in the memory of Grenfell, we will change our country, not just a change in policy and regulation, although that must of course take place, but a profound shift in culture and behaviour. A rebalancing of power that gives voice and respect to every citizen, whoever they are and wherever they live. And Mr. Speaker, we will bring the full power of government to bear on this task, because that is the responsibility of service and the duty we owe to the memory of every one of the 72. And in that spirit, I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by thanking the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement, especially given the timing of Prime Minister's question time. And can I also associate myself and everyone on this side of the House with the Prime Minister's powerful words regarding the pain of the bereaved families, survivors, and all those affected by the tragic events surrounding Grenfell Tower. Many are with us today in the gallery, and I want to pay tribute to their strength and patience in waiting for this moment. It is not hyperbole to say that we would not be here today without them. It was their tenacity and strength that brought the truth to light, and for that they deserve our thanks. Their search for truth and justice is a noble one and has our full support. And whilst the Grenfell community's loss will have left a hole nothing will ever be able to fill, I hope that whatever healing is possible from today, that each and every one of them takes some small measure of it. I know they will never forget the 72 people who tragically lost their lives, and nor shall we.
Today's publication, as the Prime Minister said, is, to put it bluntly, a damning indictment of over 30 years of successive state failures. Stretching as far back as Knowsley Heights in 1991 and then multiple incidents from there, Sir Martin Morbick and the work of the inquiry have painted a picture of systemic indifference, failure, and in some notable cases, dishonesty and greed. Sir Martin and the team working on the inquiry are to be commended for the depth and rigour of their work. And Mr. Speaker, while such a comprehensive report as has been published today deserves to be considered in full, and I welcome the Prime Minister's commitments for time in this House to do that, there are some immediate points that I feel will command support across the House and that I'll address to the Prime Minister. First, the work to remediate and, where possible, identify new at-risk buildings must continue if we are to meet, as I'm confident the whole House would agree, the Right Honourable former member for Maidenhead's pledge that no such tragedy could occur again. I know this task is not a simple one, and I thank the Prime Minister for recognising the importance of this issue. A significant barrier to making progress quicker is financial liability. It was an issue I was all too aware of when I became Chancellor, and why one of the first major spending decisions I made was the creation of a new £1 billion fund to pay for remediation works in public and private buildings affected by materials beyond dangerous ACM cladding. And the previous government's cladding safety scheme has ensured an additional £5.1 billion is available to support remediation work, coming from a combination of a developer contribution and a building safety levy. So I'd ask the Prime Minister and Chancellor to give due consideration to any further requests, especially with the upcoming fiscal event towards the end of October. The second point I'm confident that the Prime Minister would agree on is the need to maintain and update our legal and regulatory framework to keep pace with changes in materials, construction and supply. The last Parliament passed the Fire Safety Act in 2021, but also the Building Safety Act in 2022. And I acknowledge, as the Prime Minister said, that he worked constructively with the then government to deliver those improvements. These pieces of legislation comprehensively reformed our fire safety and building regulation regimes and ensured that a new building safety regulator was created, located in the Health and Safety Executive. But I also know that these are stepping stones towards a fire and building safety regime that remains persistently fit for purpose. And in particular, I'd urge the Prime Minister to give special attention to the recommendations in today's report, especially its call for more regular updating of approved Document B, a single regulator, a sole Secretary of State responsible to end the fragmentation of Whitehall responsibilities, and a new Chief Construction Advisor. And I want the Prime Minister to know that should he deem further legislation to support proportionate and necessary measures to protect the public, whilst protecting leaseholders from excessive costs is required, then we will work collegiately with him to deliver that. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, allied to the need for continued improvement in the legal and regulatory frameworks, this report also shines a light on the significant failures of oversight. Those responsible for ensuring the independence and rigour of testing and compliance were found by this report to have had those very things compromised. In particular, the BRE, in its work with suppliers, in part enabled what Sir Martin Morbick's report has plainly described as systemically dishonest behaviour on the part of suppliers. So I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to continue to support the Metropolitan Police and Crown Prosecution Service in pursuing any appropriate criminal charges against a small number of developers and contractors who knowingly and fraudulently cut corners on building safety for greed and financial gain. And Mr. Speaker, I don't want to let this moment pass without also acknowledging the local failures today's report highlights, whether from the tenant management organisation responsible for the building itself, who allowed relationships with those living in Grenfell Tower to become so broken that tenants were marginalised and at worst ignored. The repeated fire safety reports that were not acted on. The lack of effective management and leadership at London Fire Brigade. And the local council, who had a lack of adequate oversight into the management and maintenance of the building and the cares and concerns of those living in it. Mr. Speaker, there will be further lessons to learn from this inquiry. There will be difficult questions for all those responsible acting over a long period of time. And I know that the Prime Minister will agree that we must approach those questions with the honesty and directness with which they deserve. And let me conclude, Mr. Speaker. At the time, the former Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead apologised to the victims for what she described as failures at a local and national level in response to the fire. I share in those same words still. I think today, however, demands more. As a Prime Minister, current or former, you are a custodian of the state. And its failures, whether on your watch or not, are something that you feel deeply. And to that end, I want to extend my deepest apologies to the families and victims of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. The state let you down, and it must never do so again. Mr. Speaker, the mission to ensure no such tragedy can ever happen again is one I know the whole House supports. But more than that, it is part of a legacy we must create and maintain so that our actions meet the full meaning of our words.
Prime Minister.
So that was Rishi Sunak, now the leader of the opposition, responding to the Prime Minister's statement into the Grenfell inquiry report. A very united response from both leaders. Those affected by the Grenfell Tower disaster were let down very badly during and in the aftermath of the tragedy.
You've been watching and listening to PMQs Live with Gloria Di Piero and Olivia Utley. Next up, it's Good Afternoon Britain with Mark Dolan and Dawn Neeson.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. Sunshine and showers for most of us today. Some of those showers could be quite heavy across northwestern areas, but in any sunshine, it will still feel fairly warm. We've got high pressure building in for northern areas as we head towards the weekend, but before then, a number of weather fronts still bringing some outbreaks of rain throughout today. So across eastern areas, it will stay quite cloudy through a lot of today. There's a risk of some quite heavy showers breaking out in the southeast later on this afternoon. But elsewhere across southern areas of Scotland, we've already had some quite heavy showers today, and we could see some further heavy downpours later on this afternoon, as well as across parts of Wales and Northern Ireland. So it is a fresher day than yesterday, but there will be some sunny intervals, and the winds are quite light, so it will feel pleasant enough if you do catch any sunshine. Now, as we head into this evening, still pretty cloudy across eastern areas of Scotland, some drizzly rain coming into parts of Aberdeenshire. Still a risk of some quite heavy showers further west, but generally that's where the best chance of any sunshine across parts of Scotland is later on today. And sunny spells across parts of Northern Ireland, as well as some heavy downpours. Now in Wales, the west coast is where we'll see the best of the sunshine. Further inland, a risk of some cloudier skies, and across the south coast as well, a mix of cloudy skies and out